we're told like, hey, go set up a brokerage. Like, you need this. Go over to Vanguard, set it up. And they did. And nobody explained, like, once you do that, the brokerage is not, they don't know what you actually want. And they were just putting all this money in the settlement fund. And that's kind of like with your TSP, if you just leave it and don't pay attention, and they just automatically deposit into the life cycle funds. And next thing you know, you're averaging 5% returns instead of 8%, and you have to work until you're 80 instead of retiring when you're 60. Welcome to Service and Wealth, the podcast dedicated to helping military personnel master their finances and achieve financial freedom. Our mission is to guide you through the ins and outs of planning, saving, and investing, and most importantly, how to balance savings so you can enjoy life now and retire with confidence. All right, here we go. We are down to it. This is episode 4 of our mini-series, so our 4th session on investing here in the Service and Wealth podcast. We're already up to, this is, the start of our 3rd month in the podcast, doing weekly episodes, which is cool. And so for all of you who've been listening and downloading, whether that's from our website, we put the link out to the podcast where you can find it on our website in our weekly newsletter. Or if you're following along on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, wherever you get the podcast, thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading. And, the best thing is obviously to share it. Become a subscriber, share the episode with your friends, and then leave us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, because once we start getting reviews, then Apple and Spotify will start doing the work for us by promoting it in search results and starting to push it out to people who listen to similar podcasts. And, ultimately the goal here is just to share the information and get strategies and tips on building and managing wealth out there into the military and veteran community and to all of our military families and spouses. And that's the entire purpose, the entire vision of the Military Wealth Coach, and why we do the podcast. And then, there's also the possibility of some background noise from something that is, I think it's pretty cool. We've got a 6-year-old daughter, and her grandpa has been teaching her to use a drill press, and apparently she's very capable. That's another skill that never thought my daughter would learn, especially not at 6. But she's out there helping Grandpa do some projects and woodworking, and it's pretty neat. But all that aside, in our first of these 4 series, we talked about like why you just need to invest, and how that creates some rules about minimum, interest rates on accounts or returns that you need to get, and the time frame and the consistency. And then in the second episode, we talked about basically like how to invest in order to actually get to your goals, and that required setting some additional rules in terms of target portfolio returns, right? Because you can't have $100,000 sitting in cash earning 0 and $100,000 in your TSP retirement account earning 5% because it's in a life cycle fund, and imagine that you're somehow going to become wealthy, because you got to average out the 0% and the 5.5%. Now you're not even getting 3% across all your wealth, which means overall, in that particular example of somebody who's just in a life cycle fund and has a bunch of cash sitting in a savings account, like their money is actually, even though they have investments in the TSP that would be getting, growing each year, overall their buying power is going down. Right, and so that's why we talked about how you got to target 8% across all your portfolios, and that's why you've got to move all your cash into high yield savings accounts that are getting you around 5%, and then your TSP or your brokerage account should just be 100% stocks, because then you're going to get 10 to 11%, and that'll average out right in the 8% ballpark. And that's what you need to grow wealth and double your wealth every decade or faster. And when we got through that, we had a buy box. We had sort of 5 things that we always wanted to use in our strategy. And then last week we said, okay, now finally you've got this buy box. You've fit, 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 possible investment choices in there. You've thrown out the rest. Again, using the TSP as an example, you've thrown out the G fund, you've thrown out the life cycle funds, you've thrown out the F fund, you've thrown out the I fund. And you're like, well, the C and the S fund, like they both kind of work in this particular example. And so now I just got to choose between them. And I'm going to make sure that, they're not too risky. So I'm looking for this thing called beta of like 1, which means that they're the same risk level as the rest of the stock market. And then I'm going to look at fees and returns. And, the fees are going to be, I'm going to try to pay 0 fees, which could lead you to only investing in stocks or ETFs in your brokerage account, because those are generally free these days. But more and more mutual funds are also becoming free or essentially free. Like if, it costs 0.01% for your expense ratio, let's not get too upset about the difference between 0.01 and 0.00, right? Like they're both basically free. But what you don't want to do is be investing in things that have like expense ratios of 0.5% or 1% or higher. And we'll give an example of that today. And then, all things being equal, if the beta is the same and the expense ratios are the same, go with the one with the higher returns, right? Like don't overthink this whole question of diversification. Like, oh, should I buy the S fund in my TSP for diversification? No, the C fund outperforms the S fund by 2 to 3% every year, and the C fund owns 500 different stocks within it, right? So what we really try to get through in the first 3 episodes was a simplification where you just kind of narrowed things down and you don't get distracted by the noise, and you stop worrying about some of the, Wall Street gimmicks about diversification or paying higher fees to get special, actively managed funds. Like all of that is just noise, and you just got to cut through it and trust the data, trust the numbers, right? We've repeatedly referred to, 97 years of S&P 500 data, 100 plus years of other data in the U.S. stock market. And there's no sense in trying to go against the data. Like it just consistently and repeatedly drives you to investing in the S&P 500 and investing in passively managed index funds that are free or close to free. Everything else is just adding costs or adding unnecessary, guesswork, right? So that's kind of where we got to. And after 3 episodes with this strategy, you're going to have a portfolio that looks something like, 5, depending on where you are in your life and your saving and investing journey, anywhere from 1 to 5 to 10 to maybe $20,000 in a high yield savings account for your emergency savings fund, and maybe you're growing a little bit of a war chest, right? Some other cash that you're saving up for investments and purchases in the next 3 to 5 years, whether it's, a car, a house, a rental property, or some other investment. And then you've got anywhere from, if it's your first year, you're in your first year of saving for retirement, and that's all you're doing. You should have $6,000 or $7,000 in your thrift savings plan, right? Or you might be 5 or 10 or 15 years into it. If you're in your 30s, mid to late 30s, and you happen to be listening to the podcast or reading the blogs, perhaps you've got like, $300,000, $400,000 in your TSP and $200,000 in a brokerage account. And you have $50,000 in your high yield savings account, right? So you've got some sort of mix of cash in a high yield savings account, which is essentially risk-free. It's insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, up to $250,000, which means if the bank goes bankrupt, the government will cut you a check for all the money you lost, which you can't get in investments, and you can't get it if you're buying and trading bond funds. If those go to zero, you go to zero. But the high yield savings account gets the same return as the U.S. aggregate bond index has averaged over the last 60 plus years. You're getting like 5 to 5.5%, but it's risk free. So that's like the one chunk of your sort of low risk diversification within your portfolio. And then everything else is in stocks, and it's in the TSP or it's in a brokerage. And so today we're going to pick up with that. We're going to talk about sort of the automation and the management of these accounts that you've finally started and you're building up. And we're just going to kind of assume that you've got, for the sake of it, we're going to assume you have 2 high yield savings accounts, one for your emergency savings fund, one for your war chest. You've got your TSP, and then you have a brokerage account. So that's 4 different accounts. The 2 high yield savings accounts we're going to knock out first and talk about managing those. And then in the second segment of this session, we're going to talk about setting up your investment accounts, the TSP and the brokerage. Then we're going to move on, and in the last part, and so in that second segment is going to focus on automation and some of the things that you just need to, like account settings, to make sure it's consistent, it does what you want. Again, this is the key phrase, you keep control over your money, right? If you don't set your settings in a certain way, you're going to allow your brokerage to make the decisions for you. And that can maybe have no impact, or it could cost you not only lower returns, but also higher taxes, right? So you have to set those, put those settings up. But once you do it, like you're gonna make the optimal choices, and then you just leave it, right? Year after year, you don't have to do anything. And then in the third and final segment, we're just going to talk about sort of like the long run, whether it's every year or 20, 30 years into the future, the maintenance or the management of these accounts. All right. So with that, let's jump into it. Before we do, the standard disclosure, I got to say it just because, right? Like if I don't say it and somebody's listening and then they go and they do something that I suggest as a strategy and then they lose money, they might get mad. All right. But with any sort of investment, there is risk. This is not investment or financial or tax advice. These are strategies and tips. And in all cases, do your own research, make your own decisions, and if you have doubt, consult with a professional. All right. So first, we're going to talk about what to do with your cash accounts, right? So high yield savings account for an emergency savings fund. We've got a whole blog post and an earlier podcast episode on what your emergency savings fund is for and how to set the amounts that you want to have in it. And then, if you still have questions about that, just on our website, www.militarywealthcoach.com. All right, and then you have a second high yield savings account. That's your war chest, right? And that's cash you're setting aside that's going to earn interest in the short run safely out of the market. So if you're trying to save up $30,000 to buy a Honda CR-V or something so that you have a car, but it's also something that you can use to drive people around on on Uber. So what do you do as far as managing this? Well, once you set that target, you save consistently each month. And once you hit the target, you stop. If you only want $8,000 in your emergency savings fund, once you get there, stop saving and then move that amount. If you're saving $500 a month, don't stop saving $500, just stop saving it to that account. So the best way you can do it is get the calculator on your phone or on your laptop, pick your target, divide it by how much you can afford to save per month, and then when you set up the recurring transfer from your checking account where you get paid from DFAS into that high yield savings account at another bank, just set the number of transfers. So in this example, if you want to have $8,000 and you can afford $500 a month, divide 8,000 by 500, and you have 16. So when you set up that transfer, say, repeat this transfer 16 times. You don't have to think about it each month, and you don't have to remember in a year and a half to go back and shut it down. But what you do need to do is put a reminder in your phone, Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, whatever you use, that for that time, like that 16th month, and say, change savings plan or whatever. And then what you do is you come back and you'll adjust whatever other savings plan you want. So maybe your war chest, you're hoping to save up $30,000 and you're saving $500 a month. And in 16 months, you'll have $8,000 in the emergency savings and $8,000 in the war chest. But now you can switch the $500 that you were saving to the emergency savings to your war chest contribution. Now you're saving $1,000 a month. And in a short 22 months, you'll hit your $30,000 target. So that's how you can, save essentially $40,000 in 3 years. One thing you do have to consider with the emergency savings fund is new life events. Like if you hit 8,000, you're going along and you're fine. No emergencies happen. 5 years from now, you get married, or you buy a house, or you have a kid. These are things that are going to increase the amount of cash you need available in emergencies. So maybe you go from 8,000, now you need 10,000. So in that case, you want to come back and maybe edit your, automatic transfers, or just make a couple manual ones if it's not a big difference and you can afford it. Maybe you just got a re-enlistment bonus, then you can just deposit $2,000 and you don't have to set up any more, monthly recurring transfers. Now, what happens if you use your emergency savings? You've got $10,000 in there, because you got married, so you increase it a little bit, and you have 2 cars, and one of your cars it totally died. So you go out and you buy an $8,000 car. You get a nice Honda Accord, Toyota Prius, whatever it is, an old S10 or Ford Ranger, whatever you need. You spend $8,000 cash. So you've gotten a better deal because you're not financing. You pay cash, so you don't have a monthly loan payment, which steals your money through the interest that you're paying on those loan payments, and 2, it lowers your ability to borrow, right? So if you have a $400 a month loan payment, that's the equivalent of almost $100,000 on a home loan, on a 30-year home loan that you could get, right? So that, let's say you want to buy your first house and you go out there and you find one for $300,000 that you love, and the bank comes back and say, you don't qualify, you've got this auto loan payment. We can only approve you up to $225,000. Well, wouldn't you rather have enough credit with the banks to get a $300,000 mortgage so you can get the house you want instead of having to compromise and get half the house or 2/3 of the house? So you've paid cash, you've used your emergency savings fund for an emergency to avoid going into debt. So you've perfectly followed that strategy. Like, what do you do? Well, you just go back into, optimally like just a straight line repayment plan to refill that fund as fast as you can. So that might mean instead of continuing to add to your brokerage or continuing to add to your war chest or whatever, like just those cases, not TSP. You're always going to be contributing to that TSP. So it might mean stopping for like 8 months, contributing to your brokerage and your war chest if you were saving $1,000 a month to those, and just putting that $1,000 into your emergency savings fund until it fills back up. Because you can't leave it empty for too long in case another emergency happens. Now, what about the war chest? All right, the war chest is more strategic. The war chest is for those big purchases out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Generally, investments like a car that you can use as a side hustle with Uber, maybe a car that you're primarily renting out on Turo, or like your next investment property. So the good thing about that is, rather than trying to do this panicky bit of filling it back up as soon as possible, you treat it like your own bank. And you set up a payment plan. So let's say you saved up $30,000 and then you use that $30,000 to buy a rental property, you're not trying to, fill it back up in the next year. Just set up a 5-year payment plan on that $30,000, which might look like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that would probably be like about $600 a month, right? With interest. And it works because you used your war chest to buy an investment. And that investment is bringing in money from other people, from customers, tenants, whatever. And so they're actually refilling your war chest for you now with the rent that they pay you or the income you earn from your side hustle. And so by just charging interest on it, it's essentially becomes saving on steroids. And not just saving on steroids, but you're saving for your future using other people's money. And so you're increasing your cash flow, you're increasing your wealth, you're increasing your portfolio. And I have a quick example. This is not for $30,000, but this is for essentially $20,000. So in this example, you've got $20,000 cash in your high yield savings account war chest, and you want to go out and buy a new car. And I found like a 2019 Toyota Camry, which would be a great car, whether you're upgrading or it qualifies to drive for Uber, it qualifies to rent out on Turo. And if you were going to go out and finance this car, you might find yourself taking on a 60-month loan. And if we put it at 9% interest, which there's probably promotional financing deals, but let's be honest, those are usually on new cars or certified cars. And if you just buy a 2019 Camry, off of Facebook Marketplace, you're going to have to go to a bank and get a loan. And those interest rates on personal or auto loans from banks are a little bit higher. So we said 60 months, 9% interest. That works out to a monthly payment of $400. All right. And in 5 years, you would pay a bank $400 a month or $24,000 back on a $20,000 loan. So with your war chest, you just flip the script, and your war chest is the bank. And so you take the $20K out, buy the car, and then set up a monthly transfer from your checking account back into that war chest for $400. Now, if you're using that car just for yourself, you're just saving money. Your cash flow is the same. You were going to pay $400 to the bank. Now you're just saving it, right? So your cash flow is the same. It doesn't change your monthly budget. It just keeps the money in your bank account instead of putting it into the big bank. But if you're using that Camry and you're driving for Uber or DoorDash or whatever, and you're making $100 a weekend, well, guess what? That $100 a weekend that you made is paying that full $400 monthly payment. And when you finally go to buy a house and get a home loan, the bank doesn't know about that at all, right? It doesn't show up on your credit. It's not a revolving or short-term credit, so it doesn't impact your ability to get that home loan. And at the end of 5 years, you're going to have at least $24,000. In fact, you'll probably have closer to like 26 or 27 because you're putting it in a high-yield savings account. That's it, right? Like for those cash accounts, those are things that you hold and manage throughout your life. And so long as you always have to repay them. And optimally, the emergency savings fund you repay as quickly as possible from your own paycheck. The war chest you repay over time using money that you bring in from whatever investment you made with the cash. Now, what about our investment accounts? Okay, so first of all, we have the TSP. Now, the TSP, when you enlist or you commission, you're going to get auto-enrolled in the TSP, and you're going to get vested after 60 days. Now, that means they're not sure, the military's not sure that you're going to stick around or they're going to keep you during those first 60 days, so you get nothing. But after 60 days, you get to set up your account at tsp.gov, and you can start making contributions through MyPay. So it's a two-step process. Online's better. You can call, like you'd have to Google their phone numbers because who calls on the phone anymore? But online's always better. And what you want to do is, as soon as you can, you start saving $575 a month into your TSP. So long as you do that, you're going to put yourself on this flight path where you're going to end up with about $2.5 to $3 million around age 65. And that's going to set you up for a massive six-figure payday every year, tax-free, from your TSP for the rest of your life. So that's your goal. And it starts when you put $575 a month in right away. Now, after 60 days, you start to get a little bit of a matching contribution. And you also, after 2 years, so in the start of the 25th month of your service, then you get the full 5% match. And that adds on to it. And that's what helps you get to that goal, because your actual, from your contributions alone, you would come up a lot shorter than that 2.5+ million. You'd be in like the 1.5 million range. But over the years, that BRS matching, that 5% matching, is what's going to give you about an extra $100K when you leave the service, and that's going to double 3 or 4 times and really reinforce your total savings. So the way to do it is you log into MyPay. You figure out, first you got to Google what your base pay is, or grab your LES and look at what your pre-tax base pay is, and then divide 575 by your pre-tax base pay. And so that's going to give you a percentage of like anywhere from 6 to 29% based on whether you're, a 20-year 05 or your first year as a E1. And in MyPay, you go over to your TSP allocation in the menu and enter that percentage in from your base pay and hit submit. That's all you need to do, right? Now we're going to have a future episode where we talk about strategy between Roth and traditional contributions, but we won't touch on that today. Then the second step is you go over to tsp.gov, and again, you can create your account after 60 days. That's when DFAS sends your info to TSP and says, okay, this person is now eligible, so let them sign up. And then you're going to go in there and you're going to find your allocation or contribution tab, and you're going to see a menu, and it's got all the different funds. And as we've said, there's really only one choice to make based on performance, cost, and your minimum threshold of returns, and that's the C fund. Now we'll have another episode about TSP funds where we break down a little bit more why the life cycle funds are such terrible products to invest in. But again, we're going to leave them alone for now so we can move through this. And so you set up your TSP, and you would really just say, like, I want 100% of my allocations, my payroll contributions to go to the C fund, and I want 100% of my matching funds coming from BRS to go to the C fund. And then everything will go into the C fund. If you're getting into this late and you've just been letting the default go, TSP has been putting your money in a life cycle fund. And if you can't read between the lines, right, like, you need to move it out, because that is a terrible investment choice. And so you can also go to the transfers menu here in the TSP and tell them, move 100% of the money in the life cycle fund out and into my C fund. And once you do that once, like, that's it. Like, your TSP, account management is like literally the one time that you set it up that way. And then you just leave it for like the next 40 years. Okay. So it's super easy. On the flip side, we'll in just a moment, we'll explain you do have to do some things in MyPay. So TSP, that's easy, right? It's a one-time setup, set it, forget it. There's not a lot of options. There's not a lot of, settings that you need to worry about. They're going to automatically reinvest dividends and capital gains for you because you can't have them because it's a retirement account. So you're not retired. You can't have them. They're automatically going to do it. Now that contrasts with the brokerage account. So the brokerage, that's when we're talking about Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, E-Trade, Robinhood, Interactive Brokers. And for those, you can set those up whenever. And depending on the brokerage, you're going to have to set up your automation either 100% within the brokerage or a combination of your checking account and the brokerage. But what you want to do is, when you set it up, link your bank You'll probably have to do some trial deposits overnight to like confirm things. But once it's set up, you're going to want to set up automatic investments. And that should be a under your investments tab or wherever on the particular platform. You set up your automatic investments and you put in there whatever amount you have already figured out from your budget you can afford. Maybe it's just $100 right now. Maybe it's $500 per month, $50 per paycheck, whatever it is. But get that set up. And this first time around, you're going to make your first purchase of an investment. So let's say you put $500 in and you buy some Facebook stock. Excuse me. Once you've purchased that first asset, mutual fund, ETF, stock, whatever, you can have to do a couple other things. You have to set up what you want to happen with the cost basis and what you want to do for dividends or capital gains. And this is all once you own the asset, and it's for each one, right? So if you're just investing in S&P 500 mutual fund, and that's it, like you're just like I listen to Bigger Pockets, I am going to be VT, SAX, and chill, like that's my investment strategy. Then you buy VT, SAX, you set this up one time for that one asset, and you never change it. If you're feeling like a little bit more adventurous and you like picking stocks and buying stocks, each time you do it, you're going to have to do this. But the first is you find the cost basis summary, and that's usually a link on the dashboard, cost basis summary. You go to there, and you then will select change or update cost basis. And cost basis is an important thing to do because it allows you to pick which shares you're going to sell when you eventually sell. Usually the default is first in, first out, and that can be a problem. Like let's say you start investing in a stock that's $1 today, and in 10 years is worth $100. And you need $100 cash for whatever reason. So you want to go in and sell one share of this stock, but you've been buying it every year. If you leave it to default to this first in, first out, when you sell that one, the brokerage is going to sell the first one you bought, which you only paid $1 for. Which means as soon as you sell it, or they sell that one for you, they're going to record that you made $99 of profit, and they're going to report that to the IRS. And now you're going to owe taxes, possibly, right? There are others. You can do an average cost basis, which doesn't get much better, right? Because in that case, maybe it averages out that over all the shares you own, the average you paid for was $40. So you're still going to have taxes. There might be a last in or a highest in, first out. But again, that's letting the brokerage choose for you. Instead, what you want to pick is specific ID, or it might be spec ID, SPEC ID. This allows you, when you do sell, to look at the whole list of all the shares that you own and pick the ones you want to sell. Now, why is that important? Well, in this example in which you need $100 cash for whatever reason, and you don't have the emergency savings fund, or you don't have the war chest, and you just need that $100, you can go and find a share that you own that you bought for $100. Now you sell it, you get that $100. There's no profit to report, and so there's no taxes. There's no complication. Or better still, what we'll talk about for annual maintenance of your account is a thing called tax loss harvesting. And we'll get to that more in detail, but the important point to remember now is that when you set up specific ID, it allows you to pick the share that you want to sell when you sell it, and this allows you, future you, right, to minimize your tax burden and be smarter and keep more of your money in your pocket. Now, the other one you want to do is you're going to go in Vanguard. This is under your profile and settings. It might be under transactions or account details in other brokerages, but usually it's under your profile and settings because you kind of have to kind of have to manage it a little bit higher level and apply it to everything, but you're going to want to find your dividend and reinvestment settings. And you're going to go in there and you're going to choose to reinvest, right? The options are either reinvest or to pay out into your settlement fund or like transfer back to your original bank account. And you want to reinvest. You also, for at least the first decade of your investing journey, you're going to want to do the same with capital gains, reinvest. And when you choose reinvest, what that does is it tells the brokerage, anytime you make a profit without selling, for example, if you own a $100 stock of Facebook, and we're just picking on that because it's the first thing that popped in my head, and they pay every quarter they announce their profits and they share a little bit with people who own their stock. And let's say they say, we had $1 per share profit that we're paying out as a dividend. Well, each quarter you get $1 extra. And if you reinvest it, well, that's like, $1 on $100 is 1%. So if Facebook stock goes up 8% over the course of a year, that looks like an 8% return on investment. But if each quarter they paid you $1 dividend and you reinvested it, your $100 of Facebook is now $112. So you actually got a 12% return on investment that year. And it's all in Facebook. So it's going to continue to compound over time. Now, what we've broken down in some of our other materials and in our books is we explain that the way you get to these returns of 8 or 9% per year after inflation has a lot to do with your dividends being reinvested. The average dividend paid on the S&P 500 is about 1.7% per year. And that's how you get these great returns. If you take away that 1.7%, after inflation, you're not going to get an 8% real return on your money. You're going to be more like 7.5%. So by reinvesting your dividends, you're essentially, it's like, an accelerant or like injecting some like nitrous into an engine. It turbocharges your returns, and that's going to get you more money faster in your investment account. Like we said, in TSP, they automatically do that for you because it's a retirement account, so they can't pay you out your dividends or your capital gains. That just all goes in. And you want to set that same exact thing up for your brokerage account. The one consideration there is it'll be minimal, right? Dividends and capital gains are taxable. So if you get paid out, $100 worth of dividends per year and you reinvest it, the $100 doesn't go in your pocket, but it does get reported to the IRS, and it might increase your taxes by $10. But that's fine, because $10 is nothing. And in fact, you're talking about needing like more than $500,000 in your brokerage account before dividends and any taxes owed on them start to become a serious thing to plan for, right? So minimal cost, minimal complication, but over 10, 20 years, it's going to add 1% to 2% to your returns, and that's going to help you double your money more quickly. All right. One last comment about the setting up your brokerage. And once you've set it, if you just set it up, right, they're going to create for you what's called a settlement fund. Usually it's a money market fund, which is going to pay 2 or 3 or 4% per year, which is not enough. Often it's lower than inflation, so it's kind of it's better than a savings account, but it's kind of dangerous, and it's not really an investment. If you don't actually tell your brokerage what stocks or mutual funds to buy, all your money is just going to go straight into that settlement fund, and it's going to sit there. And I've talked to several young officers who, through podcasts or through courses, classes at their unit or on base or even at the service academy that they went to, were told like, hey, go set up a brokerage. Like, you need this. Go over to Vanguard, set it up. And they did. And nobody explained, like, once you do that, the brokerage they don't know what you actually want. And they were just putting all this money in the settlement fund. And that's kind of like with your TSP, if you just leave it and don't pay attention, and they just automatically deposit into the life cycle funds. And next thing you know, you're averaging 5% returns instead of 8%. and you have to work until you're 80 instead of retiring when you're 60, right? So in your brokerage account, you have to set up your automatic transfers, and then one of two things happen. So using the example of saving $500 a month into our brokerage, if you just tell your brokerage to withdraw $500 a month from your checking account and do nothing else, it's just going to pull that $500, it's going to put it in the settlement fund. The same goes if you set it up through your bank and you go to USAA and you're like, hey, transfer $500 every month to this brokerage account. It goes into the settlement fund. So within your brokerage, you need to also tell it what you want it to invest. And in Vanguard, it's pretty easy. If you're using a different brokerage, like just play around and see how it works. Like I'm not about to create accounts at like 18 different brokerages just to like get the answer for you. But in Vanguard, when I set up automatic transfers, it asks me, where do you want this money to go? And I just have to change it. And I say, don't put it there, put it into this stock. So you have to set that up to tell it where to put the money so that you don't just end up with a slightly glorified savings account at a brokerage instead of actually investing in stocks. All right, so these are the initial steps you got to take to set up. And then once you set it up, you got to do a little bit of annual maintenance. Now, going back to the TSP, the only annual maintenance you really need to do is to adjust in MyPay the percent that you want to contribute. Because as you get raises, you don't really want your TSP contribution to go up, up, up. You know, if you start at 16% of your base pay to get that $575 a month, in 4 years, your base pay is going to be, not quite double, but you don't want to be saving $1,000 a month into your TSP. Keep it at $575. It's getting reinforced from the BRS matching, but you have an extra like $300 or $400 cash flow now that you can start putting into your war chest, your emergency savings fund, your brokerage account to build accessible and useful wealth faster. And so really just do that in December, like set a calendar, repeating calendar reminder. That's what we do like for December 21st, not the very end of the year, because you have to have some trading days left and some working days left. And especially for the TSP and MyPay, like they always take effect like the following month, not the next payday. So you don't want to let it linger until January, but you go in there and you'll just recalculate your new base pay after your, time in service increase, your promotion, pay raise, whatever, $575 divided by that new base pay, and go into MyPay in December and change the percentage. And it's going to go down by 1 or 2 or 3% per year to keep you on that straight line savings. The other thing is you may, or you really should, like may is, because like maybe you don't care, but all your BRS contributions, matching contributions go into the traditional TSP. And what that means is eventually you have to pay tax on it, right? You don't pay tax up front, you're going to have to pay tax eventually. But there's a way around that, and it's something called a backdoor Roth conversion. So over at your brokerage, at the end of this first year, December 21st, we'll call it, right before you kick out on leave for the holidays, and you go back into your TSP, and you open up your brokerage account, and in your brokerage account, you open a Roth IRA. Not a traditional. Do not open a traditional, because if you make any contributions to a traditional IRA, you no longer can do the backdoor Roth. So the backdoor Roth is from your like traditional retirement plans or traditional IRA into a Roth IRA. But if you have the TSP and you make contributions into a traditional IRA, you ruin it. So you just open a Roth IRA. And then in December, let's say you got a total of $1,200 in BRS matching contributions into your traditional TSP over the course of 2024. So, and then they grew a little bit, so now you got $1,500 in that traditional account. 30 years from now, that could be worth, $50,000, $100,000. And if you took it out, you'd pay anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000 in income tax on it. But now, today, in December 2024, you go into TSP because you're just updating. You just updated your MyPay contribution. Now in TSP, you go to the rollovers tab, and under rollovers, you do request a rollover to a qualified retirement plan, and you select your Roth IRA. You put your account information in there, and TSP sends that $1,500 from your traditional TSP to your Roth IRA at your brokerage. They're going to report to the IRS that you converted from traditional to Roth, and then the IRS is going to tax you on that $1,500. For most in the military, it's going to come out to about 8% effective tax rate. So it'll come out to maybe about $120 in taxes that you owe, but that'll just come out of your refund will be slightly less. You're not actually going to have to come out of pocket for that $120. Now, your money in that Roth IRA is going to continue to grow, and when you eventually want to take it out, take $100,000 out 40 years from now in retirement, it'll be tax-free. So big time savings. Every year, if you do this, each year you're matching BRS depending on your rank and time in service. Your BRS matching contributions will range from like a few $100 up to an officer, in their 20th year of service in 2005 is going to get about $6,000 in matching, right? There's no limits on what you can do with a backdoor. And in fact, when you go from your TSP, traditional TSP, into a Roth IRA, it's kind of considered like a mega backdoor Roth. So like maybe you don't do it for a few years and you've got $25 or $30 or $80,000 sitting in your traditional TSP, you can convert over $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And one of the things that we talk about in Service and Wealth is using your deployment years when you are in a combat zone tax exclusion area and you don't owe federal income tax or any income tax. Just do a mega backdoor, convert over like $40,000, $50,000 from your traditional TSP into that Roth IRA, and they'll tax you on it, but you weren't paying any tax on any of your other income. And so your total taxes for the year will be the same or less as they would be in a normal year. But now you've accomplished this, major victory in terms of taxes in retirement. All right, so that's sort of your TSP. And then you just do that every year, and then eventually someday you'll be old and retire. In the brokerage, on an annual, the most important thing you do, again, you're checking in like December 21st. You're looking for things that you invested in that sucked. I think it was called like Novavax. It's a stock that was sort of like good during COVID because they make like vaccines, but they've struggled, and so essentially like I invested in some of that and it was not a good investment. And at the end of the year, my investments were down like 10, 12%. And so I sold them, right? And it's something that Warren Buffett talks about all the time is you don't get rich by keeping losers and selling winners. You get rich by keeping winning stocks and selling the losers. And so at the end of every year, you want to go in there and see if you made any bad choices, and then you sell them. Now, this is what we referenced earlier with tax loss harvesting, is being able to pick the ones to sell. And so the IRS will let you take up to $3,000 in capital losses each year and then reduce your taxes by that amount, which can save you $300 or $400 or $500 in taxes. And so, if you only own a couple $1,000s of a losing stock, like just sell it all. It doesn't matter. But maybe you took a massive bonus and you invested like your $50,000 critical skills retention bonus in a stock, and that stock is down by like $10,000. That would give you potentially a $10,000 write-off. But since you're limited to only a $3,000 write-off per year, what you could do is you could go in and you could, using your specific ID, you could go in and say, I want to sell this stock ABC, and just start ticking the boxes next to the shares that had the biggest loss until you get up to $3,000 in total losses, sell all those in December, and then in January come back and do it again. And now you've got 2 years worth of additional tax deductions to save you money. And so that's sort of your annual review on your brokerage account. Find the ones that aren't working, sell them, and take the profits and go buy the ones that are. And eventually what you'll do is it's kind of like learning from your mistakes. It's like a hot wash after training. If you sell $10,000 worth of a loser stock that is down 10% and you invest in $10,000 now in, winning stock that's going to return 10% per year, you're just, you're making a stronger portfolio. So, and that's your annual. And then in the long run, right, the long run, we're just talking about at this point, we're not going to talk about actually planning for retirement income because we want to wrap this up. But like the long run, we're looking at what do you do with these accounts when you separate from the service. And with a brokerage, obviously nothing. You're just keeping it with you and you're going to continue going. It's a lifelong wealth building account that is non-retirement, so you can use it whenever you want. With the TSP, the big question is, what do I do? Well, first and foremost, you keep it. Now, as soon as you're no longer, an active employee of the DoD, you're not getting paychecks from DFAS, you can't contribute to the TSP anymore. It's an employer-sponsored plan, which means the main way you make contributions is your employer, aka DFAS, holding money back from your paycheck and putting it in for you. So if you're not getting a paycheck from them, you can't make contributions. But what you can do is so long as you have at least $200 in there, your account will stay open and you can always use the TSP. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you get out after 4 years. You've only got a few $1,000s in there. You're like, should I keep it? Yes, you should. You go out and you get a job as a contractor with the DoD. And this is a real thing, right? So like if you're a DoD contractor, in most cases, you're going to have a retirement 401k, not the TSP anymore, the civilian version, the 401k. And those are, a lot of cases, managed by Transamerica. Transamerica offers some pretty expensive mutual funds. We keep talking about you want to pick mutual funds that are cheap, almost free. And the funds, like the C fund in the TSP, has a 0.05% expense ratio. That same fund, it's a different name, it's not the C fund, but that same fund from the Transamerica 401k is almost 30 times more expensive. I think the expense ratio is like 1.41%, which is a killer cost. Well, you want the advantages of saving for retirement and getting a match from your employer with that new plan, but you don't want to lose all the money from the fees that they charge. So let's just say you're at this contractor, they match 5%, just like the BRS did. So you're over there, you're contributing 5%, they're adding 5%, and then what you do is every December, instead of investing in their crappy mutual fund, their super expensive mutual fund, you just leave it sitting in like cash in that 401k. And then every December, you just say, I want to roll over out into my TSP. And then you get to put it into the TSP, invest in the C fund, and have a really cheap mutual fund that you're investing in for retirement. And that extra, 1.25% that you're not paying in an expense ratio is going to save you over 4 or 5 years at the end of your working career in terms of when you reach your goals, right? If you invest in the C fund and you want to hit $2 million at age 60, you can do that on the $575 a month plan. If you were now contracting and investing through Transamerica and paying 1.5% expense ratio to get to that $2 million, you're going to have to work until you're like 65 or 67, right? So it saves you a lot of time by using the cheap funds in the TSP for your retirement plan. But should you leave all of your money in there? Well, that's kind of up to you. Actually, before we go there, there's one other reason to keep your TSP open. All right. So the IRS, and we've said this before about your retirement funds, the IRS will charge you taxes and a 10% penalty if you pull money out before age 59 and a half. So you don't want to. However, because the federal government, owns the IRS and they also own the military and stuff, they put some special loopholes out there. And one's called the Rule of 55. Now, there are ways to withdraw your retirement savings early, but they're pretty prohibitive. And if you screw them up, you not only lose it, but you also lose your Roth status on everything. So if you had $2 million and you wanted to retire early at age 55 and you don't have the TSP, you have to get on a specific 6-year payment plan that you can't change. If you do change it, the entire $2 million in your Roth loses the special Roth characteristic, and now you're going to get taxed on it. So it's really risky. It's hard to do. You have to pay an accountant a bunch of money to do the paperwork. But if you have money in the TSP, at age 55, you can say like, I'm retiring from federal service, and I want to start my retirement now. And you can start pulling out of the TSP without the penalty and without tax. Better still is the rule of 50, and that's if you retire at age 50 after 25 years of federal service. So you commission, you're 23, 24, you commission, and you serve for 27 years in the Navy. Now you're 50, and you want to retire. The rule of 50 allows you to now, the IRS has to treat you like you're 60 in terms of no taxes and no fees or penalties on that early TSP withdrawal. You can't do it with a normal 401k, so you just keep your TSP for that. So those are two really powerful reasons to keep the TSP. In summary, you've got your cash accounts, high yield savings accounts, and those are things where you're just going to make monthly deposits, automate them until you reach your goal, and then you're going to pay yourself back or refill those accounts, again, on like a steady monthly payment plan. For your TSP, when you set it up, you've got a kind of a 2-step dance where you set up the MyPay contribution and you set up the TSP account for which fund you want to invest in, Footstomp C fund. And then each year with the TSP, you're going to go in and you're going to adjust your percent contributions in MyPay, and you just kind of leave the TSP bit alone. In your brokerage account, there's a lot more going on with that because you have to make sure that you keep control of how you want your account managed. But basically you set it up, you buy your first investment, and then you need to make sure that you're setting your cost basis and you're setting your reinvestment of dividends and capital gains. And then each year you're going in, the TSP, like you're only invested in one fund anyway, so there's nothing to do. But in your brokerage account, at the end of every year, you're going to go in and you're going to, kind of sell the losers or shoot the losers or throw away the losers, whatever you want to call it, and get rid of those things that are not working out and move your money into profitable investments so you can continue to get 8, 9, 10% growth in your portfolio over time. And then finally, when you separate from the military, there's at least 2 strong reasons why you should keep your TSP and keep at least $200 in it. You can keep all of your savings in there, but at least $200 so that TSP keeps it open for you, so that in the future you can transfer back into it for better investments than other employers might offer, or to kind of consolidate all of your retirement savings into a Roth TSP. All right, so this concludes our 4-part series on investing. It's more like, we call it 101, 201, 301, and 401, but we probably should have just called the whole thing like freshman investing or something, or first year investing, because obviously we've got a lot more that we can talk about in this. But what we want to do is we're going to get back to some more, broad military focused topics in the next couple weeks, to kind of finish up the summer before we come back and we get into these bigger topics of like retirement planning and forecasting income and stuff like that. Because we want that to also kind of coincide with some more materials out there. But yeah, so again, thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned a few things, got some golden nuggets out of this episode. We do have a couple blog posts coming out, or that are already out from this past week, and you can link to them in the newsletter that kind of amplify what we're talking about with investing and some of the stuff that's going on in the market right now. And so, as always, share the info, forward the emails, send the website. Get people, if you haven't already, you should do it too, but get your friends and battle buddies out there to opt in at www.militarywealthcoach.com. Opt in for the newsletter, and also sign up for the upcoming mini course. And then also, we'll be back by the end of August. We'll relaunch our social media marketing to start putting this material out there and getting deals out there for loyal followers and members of the community. And so you can find us on social medias, whether it's X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest, like whatever. You just either go look for Military Wealth Coach or MWC 112358. That's MWC 112358. Well, until next week, when we're back to our regularly scheduled location and time, stay financially fit and mission ready.